truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Tuesday, May 28th, 2024, the 1224th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. Your paid subscription will give you the ad-free experience, make it possible to join in the discussion on Substack, and to join in the interactive subscribers-only live streams every Wednesday afternoon. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do in this show as it expands. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening on Substack or a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. So on Friday, we talked about Donald Trump leaving the set of Law and Order New York, the Loudest Hush Money, on Thursday afternoon and heading uptown to the Bronx, where he went into enemy territory, one of the bluest areas of the country, and attracted thousands of strong MAGA supporters from every walk of life for a massive America First love fest. Well, he continued his path through enemy territory over the weekend. We will get to all of that in just a second. But first, we do have major scenes being filmed on the set of Law & Order New York as this episode, The Loudest Hush Money, wraps up. Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, is making closing arguments in the interior set, the courtroom, while the assistant director is running the B team for the exteriors, where a pro-Biden press conference took place featuring the actor Robert De Niro and then the actors from the J6 Committee TV show, Michael Fanone and Harry Dunn, the man who just lost his Maryland primary 2 weeks ago. They got together for the exterior scene to talk about how dangerous a second term of Donald Trump would be. Robert De Niro said it would end our government. This is how we preserve our government. You know, our government, those people who bestow us with so much, everything we have, really. We could never afford to lose them, certainly not to this mean orange man. De Niro and the J6 actors were heckled by whoever was around. It's hard to tell if they were hired extras or just passersby. Most of the crowd around them seemed to be cameramen, I guess potentially for news outlets. And it seems we're being told that that little press conference is going to be used to make the case that Joe Biden is once again interfering with the process of a free and fair justice system. It wasn't enough that someone from his illegitimate DOJ was trying the case on behalf of the prosecution. Now they're attempting to film campaign commercials outside the courthouse and communicate to the jury the dangers that they might bring upon the country if they find Donald Trump not guilty for crimes that no one can describe yet. And people really think that must be some kind of exaggeration. But here's Politico a week ago, last Tuesday, the 21st. Judge, to convict Trump of felonies, jury does not need to unanimously agree on what predicate crime he committed. And this is a short one. I just want to make sure you understand what's going on here. This is Josh Gerstein. To find Trump guilty of felony-level falsification of business documents, the jury must unanimously find that Trump falsified the documents in order to commit or conceal a separate crime. But the jurors do not all have to agree on what that separate crime was, Justice Juan Merchan ruled. Trump's defense argued that to issue a felony-level conviction, all jurors should be required to agree on the predicate crime. Prosecutors initially laid out 4 possible predicate crimes, one of which the judge ruled out before the trial. The remaining possibilities are a tax crime and violations of state or federal election law. And as far as the federal goes, the Federal Election Commission already decided there was no crime. Defense lawyer Emil Bove argued that jurors should have to agree on a single predicate offense. But prosecutor Matthew Colangelo, this is the man from the illegitimate administration's fake DOJ, said the law doesn't require that. The importance of the case is not a basis for deviating from the standard application of the law, Colangelo said. There's no reason to rewrite the law for this case. Merchan agreed with the prosecution and said he won't impose the requirement the defense requested. In other words, if some jurors believe that Trump falsified business documents solely to cover up a tax crime, while others believe that he falsified business documents solely to cover up an election crime, the jury can still convict Trump on the felony level falsifying documents charges despite disagreeing on the predicate crimes. So the prosecution didn't have to prove that Donald Trump falsified these documents for a particular reason to cover up a crime that they all understand he also committed. They just have to agree that Trump falsified documents probably to cover up some crime. And falsified, by the way, we've come to learn, means that he called a legal expense a legal expense. Now, this will just be one of probably 100 different routes Trump will be able to pursue on appeal after he is obviously going to be convicted for this crime. Not that anybody knows what crime he's being convicted for. And it would seem that precedent would support him in that. Not that any of this matters, because ultimately it's the court of public opinion, which is why the TV show is happening in the first place. But this seems to be the big story of the day, so I'm here to tell you what seems to be happening. I hope everyone is mentally prepared for the headline that Donald Trump has been convicted of this crime, whatever this crime happens to be. You should be mentally prepared to hear that he's going to jail. You should be mentally prepared to see pictures of him from jail. And then you should be mentally prepared to mock all those little communists as they cheer on the unjust imprisonment of a political opponent who they are unable to beat because their point of view does not in any way represent a majority viewpoint. Simply tell them that you will remember where they stood when the tables turn. Trump reacted to Judge Merchan's instructions to the jury over the weekend. This is from Truth Social on May 26th. The reason the radical, highly conflicted Judge Juan Merchan had to come up with 3 fake options for the jury to choose from without requiring them to be unanimous, which is completely un-American and unconstitutional, is because the corrupt, Soros-backed DA Alvin Bragg couldn't come close to proving that any crime was committed. There was no crime. Legal expense paid to a lawyer was marked by a bookkeeper using a drop-down menu in a computer program as legal expense paid to a lawyer. What else could you call it? There is no case in capital letters. Just a Democrat persecutor controlled by crooked Joe Biden's White House, a Democrat judge, and a biased venue. This is nothing but an election interfering witch hunt, and the American people know it. MAGA 2024. Trump says Merchan presented the jury with fake options, and he said in capital letters, there is no case. But also, of course, that's just a euphemism. Everybody knows that Trump's just joking this time. Everyone can see that it's a very real case, and it's a conspiracy theory to say that it's not a real case, despite it being a political persecution and prosecution featuring members of an illegitimate usurper administration, prosecuting Trump on a novel legal theory over a sex scandal where both parties admit they didn't have sex, and where the lawyer for the porn star who Trump didn't have sex with has already said that the star witness is a liar. The star witness, who himself is actually a convicted felon, has also said himself that he was a liar and stole from Donald Trump, thereby making Trump the victim. The whole trial is a television show. A man set himself on fire outside that trial, somehow making it through thousands of New York police officers because they're all down there at the trial. That's why they can't stop the Hamas protesters at Columbia. This is what we've been told over the course of these last few weeks. And as it wraps up, we are getting a press conference from Robert DeNiro and 2 of the men who played Capitol police officers in the January 6th Sham Committee's primetime television show that was produced for television, admitted by the producers to be a television show designed to convince the American public that the central narrative about the very violent insurrection really was true. But when Trump says it's fake and that there's no case, he's just using a euphemism. In actuality, he is so indicted, and he is probably going to spend 700 years in prison. And sure, for 4 of those years, he will be a duly elected American president. But beyond that, the other 696 just in prison and not president. And the public will allow that, of course, all to save our democracy. All right, so Thursday afternoon, Trump went into enemy territory, one of the bluest places in the country, up in the Bronx, spoke to this very diverse crowd, and he came away with a big win that had the mainstream media actually doing his work for him, advertising to the entire country that this set of early adopters, members of what is marketed to us as the Democrat Party's base coming out en masse, showing the entire country we are here for Donald Trump. We are proud to support Donald Trump from our home in the Bronx. This is what Blue America is actually like at this point. The media had to try to frame Donald Trump going into enemy territory. They did a very bad job of it. They freaked out. They tried to pretend that it was all about something it wasn't actually about. They tried to sell Americans on the idea that the only reason all these various factions of the Democrat Party base would be coming out to vote for Donald Trump, it was all about their pocketbook. Donald Trump was going to make the economy marginally better in the eyes of these very clueless and ill-informed voters who don't realize that our economy is actually doing wonderfully well under the stewardship of Joseph Robinette Biden, a man who received the most votes of all time, 81 million real lawful American votes. These factions of the Democrat Party base, they just have it wrong. Joe Biden is great. They don't realize it. Why? Because of conspiracy theories and disinformation. Joe Biden is not a doddering old pervert, one of the most corrupt politicians in American history. He's actually a spry, effective, decent man, the adult in the room, a moderate, a unifier, just as the country was told 4 years ago. But of course, no one believes that. So what we are left with is Democrat Party meltdown. This is from this morning in Politico. Dems in full-blown freakout over Biden. Now, we're not going to go through this entire article, but I want to hit some points. A pervasive sense of fear is settled in at the highest levels of the Democrat Party over President Joe Biden's re-election prospects, even among office holders and strategists who had previously expressed confidence about the coming battle with Donald Trump. All year, Democrats have been on a joyless and exhausting grind through the 2024 election. But now, nearly 5 months from the election, anxiety has morphed into palpable trepidation, according to more than a dozen party leaders and operatives. And the gap between what Democrats will say on TV or in print and what they'll text their friends has only grown as worries have surged about Biden's prospects. Now, let's pause for a second, because that is a concept that we have talked about on this show for years. I often use the metaphor of a dinner party, whereas in 2020 and before, there may have been one person at a dinner party who is willing to speak up against the consensus opinion, the woke opinion, the anti-Trump opinion. And I'm talking about if you're not in MAGA country. 1 out of 10 might have spoken up. 2 out of 10 would have agreed with that one, but they would be too afraid to speak up because you still got the other 7 there. And everyone's betting that the rest of them would all be on that anti-Trump side, that anti-MAGA side. They trust the science. They trust the experts. They knew the vax was very safe and effective. They know Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. They know there was a very violent insurrection. They know that Putin had a very brutal invasion of Ukraine, and on and on. And their perceived majority opinion and their willingness to inflict emotional and reputational damage on anyone who dissents will keep people silent. And so, because everyone remains silent, or maybe there's only one person speaking up, there is the illusion of majority on the other side. Now, over the years, that has changed. Maybe one person was speaking up and 2 people agreed. Now all those 3 people are speaking up, and it turns out that 3 or 4 other people at that dinner party already agreed. And so now the people willing to inflict emotional and reputational damage, they're a small minority. And as soon as everyone's actual opinion is stated, it becomes clear to everybody that people on the America First side, Trump supporters, quote unquote, conspiracy theorists, don't have to be silent anymore because their positions are clearly majority positions. They begin to realize they were cowed into silence under the illusion of their own minority status. And so that is what is fading away now. The people who go along to get along, well, they are switching sides, and you could argue that maybe they already have. People understand that the power position is no longer behind the uniparty and its series of mainstream issues, but that small and loud minority who is always prepared to exact emotional and reputational damage for dissent, that effect might work in public, and maybe people are still quiet in public, but the undercurrent is shifted. Now, when people support those positions in public, they understand they're lying and that other people will know it. The visible figures may go out on television and repeat the party line, but they know it's not true. And in private conversations where they're not just on TV lying to the regime's subjects, they're telling a much different truth. Let's continue. You don't want to be that guy who's on the record saying we're doomed, or the campaign's bad, or Biden's making mistakes. Nobody wants to be that guy, said a Democrat operative in close touch with the White House and granted anonymity to speak freely. Oh, yes, you got to get these anonymous quotes so that we don't think the Politico writers are just opining themselves. But Biden's stubbornly poor polling and the stakes of the election, quote, are creating the freakout, he said. This isn't, oh my God, Mitt Romney might become president. It's, oh my God, the democracy might end. Despite everything, Trump is running ahead of Biden in most battleground states. He raised far more money in April, and the landscape may only become worse for Democrats. With Trump's hush money trial concluding and another, this one involving the president's son, set to begin in Delaware. And of course, they're talking about the fake president's son. The concern has metastasized in recent days as Trump jaunted to some of the country's most liberal territories, including New Jersey and New York, to woo Hispanic and black voters as he boasted improbably that he would win in those areas. And of course, he will win in those areas. He has already won in those areas. As soon as we have a legitimate election, that will be obvious to everyone. Of course, the fake elections are how they keep up the illusion that we are actually a 50-50 country. We're not. We had a vast majority in 2020, and it has only grown since. While he's long lagged Biden in cash on hand, Trump's fundraising outpaced the president's by $25 million last month and included a record-setting $50.5 million haul from an event in Palm Beach, Florida. One advisor to major Democrat Party donors provided a running list that has been shared with funders of nearly 24 reasons why Biden could lose, ranging from immigration and high inflation to the president's age, the unpopularity of Vice President Kamala Harris, and the presence of third-party candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We're going to talk about third-party candidates in just a moment. So some Democrat is keeping a list of reasons why Biden might lose, and that makes it worth writing this article. This would be better presented as a listicle on BuzzFeed or maybe Elite Daily or Thought Catalog circa 2016. But instead, it's Politico, and we're pretending that some very astute and prominent advisor put together this list of things that only the very astute advisor class can figure out. The hilarious thing, of course, is that you could list 20 things, this advisor could list 20 things, and leave off all the important ones, because the important ones are the ones no one's allowed to say. Like, everybody understands Joe Biden didn't receive 81 million real lawful American votes, and that makes him a usurper and a traitor. That means he has committed treason, and that's why he's not going to win re-election. Back to Politico. There have been few moments in Biden's term as president that haven't been second-guessed, and his aides have made sport of sneering at grim predictions, compiling dossiers of headlines and clips in which the president was underestimated. Biden campaign aides and allies point to some positive polls, including in the battlegrounds, and Trump's comparative lack of campaigning and infrastructure in the key states, including staff, organizing programs, and advertising. Yeah, it's almost like a real campaign isn't even happening. Joe Biden campaigns from his basement. Donald Trump does rallies and gets visibly persecuted by the illegitimate regime. And the standard issue villagers out there just pretend everything is as normal. A Biden campaign advisor granted anonymity to speak freely stressed that the president's team never made any indication that Trump's hush money trial would help or hurt him. Instead, the advisor contended that Trump will be forced to defend cutting back abortion rights, attacking democracy, and advancing corporate interests as president. No. He won't. This is preposterous. It's amazing that they're able to sell these notions as true to anyone. Trump's photo ops and PR stunts may get under the skin of some very serious DC people as compelling campaigning, but they will do nothing to win over voters that will decide this election. Biden campaign spokesperson Kevin Munoz told Politico, "The work we do every day on the ground and on the airwaves in our battleground states to talk about how President Biden is fighting for the middle class against the corporate greed that's keeping prices high and highlight Donald Trump's anti-American campaign for revenge and retribution and abortion bans is the work that will again secure us the White House. Give me a break." Donald Trump, when asked about abortion, says it is a state's issue. He says, "We got Supreme Court justices appointed and confirmed to the bench. They overturned Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision. Now it is a state's issue where everyone always thought it should be in the first place. The only talk of abortion bans is generated by the mainstream media in an attempt to make abortion a national issue, but it's not a national issue." Skipping down. In the swing state of Michigan, Democrat State Rep Lori Pahutsky suggested Biden's standing is so tenuous that down-ballot Democrats can't rely in November on the top of the ticket to pull us along. In 2020, there was enough energy to get Donald Trump out, and there were other things on the ballot that brought young people out in subsequent elections. She said that's not the case this time. "I worry that because we've had 4 years with a stable White House, particularly young voters don't feel that sense of urgency and might not remember how disastrous 2017 was right after the Trump administration took over." Oh, that's because it wasn't disastrous. It was a mess in the media as the Democrats and media colluded in an attempt to subvert the duly elected president in a slow-moving coup. But the country was just fine, and the country kept improving until the very deadly pandemic. Skipping down once again. Trump, meanwhile, has already started his incursion into safe blue states. His campaign's psychological warfare in New York, California, and New Jersey, where House districts will determine control of Congress's lower chamber, is spiking Democrats' already elevated blood pressure. New York Democrats need to wake up, said Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. The number of people in New York, including people of color that I come across who are saying positive things about Trump, is alarming. Skipping ahead again. This cycle, Democrats also have to contend with the war in Ukraine and the conflict between Israel and Hamas, which has deeply divided their ranks and contributed to a sense of chaos. Representative Richie Torres, a New York Democrat known for his ardent defense of Israel, was similarly concerned for his party, though he pointed to the higher costs of groceries and goods that started during the pandemic and has yet to abate. You see, that's Donald Trump's fault. The greatest political challenge confronting the president starts with an I, but it's not Israel, it's inflation, Torres said. The cost of living is a challenge that we have to figure out how to manage. He said Biden should focus on issues around affordability and continue to tout his success in capping insulin costs in areas with high rates of diabetes like his Bronx district. Oh, that was something Donald Trump did as well. The election is more competitive than it should be, given the wretchedness of who Donald Trump is, he said. In a properly functioning democracy, Donald Trump should have no viable path to the presidency. The fact of a competitive race is cause for concern. Apparently, Torres believes that a properly functioning democracy is one that does not even have legitimate elections, one that has absolutely no respect for the will of the majority, because that is what Donald Trump represents. The article then moves into a discussion of California and how MAGA is making waves in California. Speaking of Harmeet Dillon. Dillon was reflecting on her run-ins with Democrats in the city, where she spent years leading the local GOP before her law firm represented Trump in legal fights to remain on state ballots. Few Democrats are willing to confide in Dillon about their fears, she conceded, but no one is sharing a sense of enthusiasm for Biden either. The most diplomatic thing I hear from Democrats is, oh my God, are these the choices we have for president? And of course, that line is the repetition of a slogan they've been fed by the media. They've been given permission to say that Joe Biden is bad and they're disappointed with Biden as long as they frame it in a way that says both of them are bad. And that means our system is the problem. But since we can't change the system except by voting in contests like this one, we're still going to have to support Joe Biden like our lives depend on it. And of course, their viewpoint is supported by their controlled opposition on the uniparty right, all of those very responsible conservatives that consistently affirm to the uniparty left that, yes, we don't like Donald Trump and you don't like Joe Biden. Therefore, no one likes either of these candidates, except, of course, for the fact that that is only actually true of one of them. Donald Trump happens to be the most popular politician in America. He might be the most popular politician in American history, and he might be the most popular figure in the world right now. Standard issue villagers on the uniparty left and the uniparty right and the establishment of both of those factions, their intense hatred for Donald Trump does nothing to increase their actual numbers. There are very, very few of them, and they matter very, very little. It is not true that just because they know Joe Biden is old and incompetent and they deeply, deeply hate Donald Trump, that is true for anyone else besides them. What they have done over these 9 years is so transparent. They are scared of Donald Trump, therefore they hate Donald Trump. They loudly broadcast their hatred of Donald Trump. They try to give the illusion of consensus around that viewpoint. They inflict emotional and reputational damage on anyone who dissents. And in doing that, the illusion of the popularity of their position and their viewpoint is allowed to remain for a time. But it truly is nothing more than an illusion. And as soon as people get sick of it and begin to speak up, they realize, oh yeah, there's only like 3 of them. So the establishment now understands that Donald Trump is playing and winning in enemy territory. And after what we saw at the Libertarian National Convention over the weekend, it's become quite clear they're not going to get help from the outside as they have in the past. And so let's talk about the role of third parties historically, but particularly as it stands now. I'm going to make the case that these third parties are nothing more than a regime uniparty narrative device. And when I say this, I mean particularly the Libertarian Party and the Green Party, because these are the organizations that get reused again and again each election cycle to serve the narrative purpose of the uniparty's election strategy. So let's talk a bit about third-party candidates. This is history.com. This was written in November 2019. Here's how third-party candidates have changed elections. America's two-party political system makes it difficult for candidates from outside the Republican and Democrat parties to win presidential elections. Since 1920, in fact, only 4 third-party candidates, Robert La Follette in 24, Strom Thurmond in 48, George Wallace in 68, and John Hospers in 1972, have been able to win even a single electoral vote. That doesn't mean, however, that third-party candidates haven't altered the outcomes of presidential elections over the course of American history. And the first example cited is 1912, William Taft versus Woodrow Wilson. Theodore Roosevelt challenges the sitting president and creates the Progressive Party. The title for highest share of votes ever earned by a third-party candidate in American history is still held by Theodore Roosevelt during the election of 1912. After serving nearly 2 full terms in the White House, President Theodore Roosevelt opted not to break tradition and run for a third term in 1908. But when Roosevelt's close friend and hand-picked successor, William Howard Taft, failed to advance his reform-minded agenda during his first term, Roosevelt challenged the sitting president for the 1912 Republican Party nomination. Although Roosevelt overwhelmingly won the most votes during the primaries, the Republican National Convention nominated the more conservative Taft to stand for re-election. A bitter Roosevelt broke with the GOP to form the Progressive Party, nicknamed the Bull Moose Party because Roosevelt often declared himself fit as a bull moose. The party advocated the direct election of U.S. senators, women's suffrage, tariff reductions, and social reforms. So Teddy Roosevelt is basically the opposite of MAGA. Roosevelt and Taft ended up splitting the Republican vote, which led to an easy victory by Democrat nominee Woodrow Wilson. Roosevelt finished in second after winning 6 states and 27% of the popular vote. Taft was a distant third, followed by another third-party candidate, Eugene Debs. The Socialist Party nominee received nearly 1 million votes in the fourth of his 5 bids for the White House. So essentially, these third-party machinations by Theodore Roosevelt made Woodrow Wilson the president. Woodrow Wilson then proceeded to sign the Federal Reserve Act and back the Balfour Declaration that put the U.S. into World War I and committed us to forever participating in the creation of and protection of the global regime's Zionist proxy state in the Middle East, currently known as Israel. 1992, George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton. Independent Ross Perot throws his hat into the ring, takes it back, and then throws it again. After supporters gathered enough signatures to place him on the ballot in every state, Texas billionaire H. Ross Perot surged to the top of the polls in the spring of 1992. Advocating for a balanced federal budget, campaign finance reform, and congressional term limits, Perot capitalized on low public support for President George H.W. Bush. Despite his support, Perot made the sudden decision to drop out of the race in July 1992, saying that he no longer believed he could win the presidency with the improving performance of Democrat nominee Bill Clinton. He later said that the decision was based on his belief that the Bush campaign planned to spread rumors about his daughter and sabotage her impending wedding. Weeks before Election Day, Perot made the equally surprising announcement that he was resuming his campaign. The independent candidate's poll numbers remained high enough to permit his inclusion in the presidential debates with Bush and Clinton. With his folksy manner and half-hour infomercials on broadcast networks, Perot received 19% of the vote, compared to 43% for Clinton and 37% for Bush. Some Bush campaign officials believed Perot spoiled Bush's re-election by drawing more votes from Republicans than Democrats. However, in a one-on-one contest, Clinton consistently led Bush in public polling from the summer of 1992 onwards. According to an analysis of the second choices of Perot supporters conducted by voter research and surveys for major news organizations, Perot's third-party run did not alter the outcome of the election. One national exit poll found that Clinton would have beaten Bush by 500,000 more votes had Perot not been on the ballot. And you got to believe all these polls and studies. You see, our elections were real back then. And the polls were real. All of it was 100% real. Sure, Ross Perot received 19% of the vote, but really had no effect either way. The result would have been the same even if he wasn't there, because he pulled votes evenly from both sides. In 1996, Perot made a repeat bid for the White House as a candidate for the Reform Party, which he established a year earlier. In that election against Clinton and Republican Bob Dole, Perot garnered just over 8% of the popular vote. 2000, Al Gore and George W. Bush. Ralph Nader and the Green Party earned votes, but it all comes down to Florida. The election was so tight that it took a 36-day legal battle and a controversial 5-4 Supreme Court ruling before Al Gore conceded, although he won the national popular vote by more than 500,000 votes. And again, the elections were real then, totally real. Also back then, the issues in Florida, those constituted real questions about whether our elections were real, whereas all those issues in 2020, like the mail-in ballots, and Mark Zuckerberg's drop boxes, and no chain of custody, and no ballot signatures, and ballot harvesting, and ballot mules, and COVID, and unconstitutional changes to election law. All of that was just a conspiracy theory. But back to 2000. The race not only centered on the candidates from the Democrat and Republican parties, Al Gore and George Bush, but on third-time presidential candidate Ralph Nader, an American lawyer, political activist, and consumer advocate. Nader was the Green Party candidate. Nader hoped to earn 5% of the popular vote, which would have given his party access to federal matching funds in the following presidential election. Nader fell short of his goal, receiving 2.9 million votes and less than 3% of the popular vote. However, some believe Nader's third-party candidacy siphoned enough votes from the Democrat nominee to swing the victory to Republican George W. Bush. The difference was Florida, which Bush won by fewer than 600 votes, to give him a 271 to 266 electoral college edge. Had even a small percentage of the nearly 100,000 votes garnered by Nader in Florida shifted to Gore, the Democrat candidate would have won the election. In addition, the 22,000 votes won by Nader in New Hampshire were 3 times the size of Bush's margin of victory in that state. If New Hampshire had flipped to Gore, that too would have given him the victory. So you see, Ralph Nader running as a third-party candidate is why we have climate change now. If Ralph Nader hadn't been there and Al Gore ended up president, we wouldn't have had to watch An Inconvenient Truth. Just think of it. Ralph Nader responsible for 9/11 and An Inconvenient Truth. What a jerk. 2016, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, when outsiders dominated the presidential campaign. From Donald Trump to Bernie Sanders to Gary Johnson to Jill Stein, political outsiders dominated the 2016 presidential campaign from its outset. But they weren't just running on third-party tickets. Not only did businessman and political novice Donald Trump surge to the Republican nomination, Vermont's Bernie Sanders, a self-described Democratic socialist who served as an independent in the Senate, received 46% of pledged delegates during the primary campaign for the Democrat nomination. With Trump and Democrat nominee Hillary Clinton both suffering low approval numbers, third-party candidates received considerable attention throughout the campaign. Running on the Libertarian ticket for the second successive campaign, New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson received nearly 4.5 million votes, which accounted for just over 3% of the popular vote. That was the best third-party candidate performance since Perot. Green Party nominee and Massachusetts physician Jill Stein, also running in her second consecutive presidential election, made an appeal to disaffected Sanders supporters and earned just under 1.5 million votes. In addition, independent Evan McMullin appeared on the ballot in 11 states and received over 700,000 votes, including more than 20% of the vote in his native state of Utah. According to some political analysts, third-party candidates aided Trump's election. They pointed to the results in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where Stein's vote total exceeded Trump's margin of victory. Had Stein's votes in those 3 states flipped to Clinton, she would have won the Electoral College in addition to her popular vote majority. However, according to Politico, Stein rejected the claim by pointing to exit polls that not only showed the majority of her voters would have stayed home instead of casting ballots for Clinton, but that a sizable number of her supporters preferred Trump as a second choice. So if we accept the normie interpretation that our elections are real, the vote counts are accurate, and we imagine that all of these candidates are running on their own for the good of their party, out of the belief that they are best suited to become president or at least inject a new dynamic into a stale political system, well then any discussion about that third-party candidate's effect on the outcome of the race at least makes some sort of sense. If this candidate hadn't run, those people would have come out and voted for someone else, and maybe the election would have gone a different direction. And I don't deny that that could apply in some cases, at least from the perspective of the candidate. But the elections aren't real, and the vote totals aren't real. And in that case, what the third-party candidate actually represents becomes something entirely different, particularly if that third-party candidate is propped up by the uniparty, and I think that that is what we have seen in the past. Let's take another look at Teddy Roosevelt's move. This is from The Hill, a similar article about the effect that third-party candidates have had traditionally. Vice President Teddy Roosevelt became president when second-term Republican President William McKinley was assassinated by a deranged anarchist in September 1901. Roosevelt easily won re-election in 1904, but he had promised not to run for a third term in 1908. As a result, William Howard Taft became the GOP candidate and won the election. The GOP put Taft up for re-election in 1912. However, Roosevelt had grown dissatisfied because Republicans were not supporting progressive policies. So he ran on a third-party ticket, the Progressive Bull Moose Party, and he did very well, just not well enough. Taft received 23.2% of the popular vote, while Roosevelt got 27.4%, essentially splitting the Republican vote. Thus, the Democrat candidate, Woodrow Wilson, won with 41.8%, and a landslide of 435 votes in the Electoral College. As they say, elections have consequences. Under Wilson, Congress created the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913, and he signed the first income tax legislation, the Revenue Act of 1913. He also took the country into World War I in 1917, even though he had promised not to enter the war during the 1916 presidential campaign. So how about that? Taft would have had the full Republican Party vote, potentially. And instead, you had the Democrat Woodrow Wilson, you had Teddy Roosevelt taking around a quarter of the total vote, and then you had Eugene Debs, the socialist. The idea being that the Republican Party could have had more than 50% of the vote, but third-party candidates made that impossible, and Woodrow Wilson comes into power to essentially destroy the country. Just one more step in the selling out of the United States of America to the global regime. And of course, we are still suffering under the effects of that. There has been quite a bit of talk this year about third-party candidates and what effect they might have. We were told over the course of the last couple of years and throughout the fake GOP primary process that the no labels third party might run a candidate, and they might even consider courting one of the Republican participants in the fake primary, particularly someone like Nikki Haley. They thought about Liz Cheney. Prior to that, it seemed like they might go with people like Andrew Yang or Evan McMullin. There is a mythological idea about a moderate Republican who might attract all the centrists that are more establishment Republicans that will be forced to vote for Donald Trump, even though they don't want to, because they know that Donald Trump could destroy our democracy. And often they just come right out and say it. They don't believe that candidate could actually win, but it would pull votes away from Donald Trump, thus making it more possible for Joe Biden to win. And all of that makes sense in the normie interpretation. And then you remember, wait a second, elections aren't real. And the outcome is decided before a single vote is ever cast. And when you understand that, the third party candidate immediately becomes a narrative device. Imagine we had Liz Cheney running right now as a no labels party candidate. We would see polls that suggest she might be getting 10% or 12% of the vote. Maybe even that 16, 17, 18% that Nikki Haley is getting in those fake primaries. That she is still getting despite dropping out and despite Donald Trump having obviously won the fake primaries. She's got no chance to win, but somehow 15 to 20% of Republican quote unquote voters are still coming out to support Nikki Haley in a primary. That right there is the voter base we would be told could shift their support to a third-party candidate like a Liz Cheney, for instance. And if that was the case, we would then be told, well, Donald Trump can't possibly hope to win back the presidency with only 80% of Republicans. And that immediately becomes a much easier narrative pitch to make than the idea that Joe Biden was able to beat Donald Trump head-to-head in a real election that we are supposed to have this fall. Now, No Labels has since said that they will not be running a candidate in this election. But just to clarify and set the scenario a little bit, this is The Economist from March 7th. Third-party candidates could be decisive in America's election, but they have to get on the ballot first. Skipping down, this is a long article. It really goes through the issue at length. And of course, The Economist is one of the key mouthpieces of the regime, just to understand the perspective here. But scrolling down to a subheading, So Proudly We Railed. This year, this effect may be especially strong. The widespread dissatisfaction with the choice of Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump may cause voters to consider other candidates, such as Mr. Kennedy. Yet when they actually cast their ballots, the sense that the race has especially high stakes may induce them to stick with one of the main candidates after all. In the 5 Economist YouGov polls conducted since the end of January, the average support for a generic third-party candidate was only 5.7%. And unlike 2016, support for such a candidacy is uniformly low across age, race, education, and sex. Voters may dislike both Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden, but most appear to dislike one a lot more than the other and are willing to vote for whomever they consider the lesser of two evils. America's electoral system not only saps support from third-party candidates, it also makes it hard for them to get on the ballot. States have a bewildering assortment of deadlines for the necessary paperwork and require different and sometimes dizzying numbers of signatures of local voters to qualify. So far, Mr. Kennedy, for instance, has made it onto the ballot in only Utah, Nevada, New Hampshire, and Hawaii, according to his campaign. And again, this is from 2.5 months ago. He brought on Nicole Shanahan as his running mate, planning to use her cash to gain ballot access across the country. Politico had a headline on this a couple of weeks ago. RFK Jr. uses major cash infusion from his running mate to fund ballot access efforts. Then there were a few articles, some discussion about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gaining ballot access by running in individual states as the representative of various small independent parties within those states. And then there was the lingering possibility that maybe he could end up being the Libertarian Party candidate for president, despite not actually being a libertarian. Libertarians are actually supposed to be on the right, but the Libertarian Party is not of the right or on the right at all. The Libertarian Party is part of the Uniparty, and we will get into that in just a second. Now, to be clear, I am not saying that libertarian philosophies are all bad. Government interference should be eliminated from a great many walks of life, and libertarians who are committed to that philosophically are just fine. I have no quarrel with those people whatsoever. But that's not really what the Libertarian Party represents. You basically have the neoliberals of the Democrat Party spreading global communism under the guise of equality and social justice. Then you have the neoconservatives of the Republican Party, the ideological descendants of Trotsky, spreading global communism through military adventurism and economic controls. And then you have whatever this Libertarian Party movement is, spreading global communism through what they call free trade, which is basically just open borders and a globalist economic agenda, combined with a laissez-faire attitude toward morality that basically just says, do what thou wilt, which is essentially Satanism. So when it comes down to it, you have 3 brands of the Uniparty, and the Libertarian Party is used as a narrative device to support the reported results of predetermined election outcomes. And because all of these historic tricks are being inverted and turned back against the Uniparty, you would expect to see the use of third parties as narrative devices turned back against the Uniparty, so it blows up in their faces. And I believe that is what we saw over the weekend. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was invited to the Libertarian Convention, and the so-called libertarians who support the fake campaign of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came out with a bunch of rubber chicken dog toys, the squeaking rubber chickens. and they wrote their little messages like Kennedy 2024. The idea was that they were all going to be squeaking these rubber chickens at Donald Trump when he was trying to speak, trying to create the image that Trump was afraid to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that Donald Trump should invite Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to participate in the June 27th debate featuring Trump and Biden. Because, of course, Donald Trump was scheduled to come speak at the Libertarian National Convention Saturday evening. Those very tough, very individualistic, very brave libertarians were going to show Donald Trump right to his face that he can't fool them. Maybe he can fool tens of millions of maggots, but not the libertarians. They're the smart ones. I mean, sure, they still think that the news is real and believe that the TV is telling them the truth about what's happening in reality. But they've got all the right takes on it. You see, they're the only ones who really understand economics. Because, of course, economics is a science. They know how science works. That's why they were so scared of COVID and think that Joe Biden really received 81 million real lawful American votes. That litmus test, by the way, survived through the weekend. It's still true that it's impossible to get past that question. If you believe Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes, you're either completely clueless or you're lying. And if you understand that he didn't, and you're still pretending he's president and trying to make sure that the duly elected president can't return to his duly elected position, then you're a traitor to the country. It is still a perfect litmus test, and it is one that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and all of his supporters are still failing. And I'm not saying that they will forever. Again, I think RFK Jr. is an op, but without the illusion of legitimate elections, what they are doing becomes immediately crystal clear, and none of us should still be under the illusion that we have legitimate elections. Now, Donald Trump should be considered a very good candidate for libertarians. Maybe he's not ideal. Maybe there are things that he did during his first term that libertarians might think they have a problem with. Usually that's because they believe the television and don't really know what's going on. But if you want to be an ideologically pure libertarian, you could make a case that Donald Trump is not an ideal libertarian candidate. But as for their actual priorities and whether or not Donald Trump moves the country more toward their priorities or more away from them, the choice is obvious. But they don't care because Libertarian Party supporters in this country right now are just normies who choose a different branding than the standard issue villagers on the uniparty right and the uniparty left. They don't want to associate with either side. They know that Joe Biden and Democrats are incompetent, and it is part of their self-image and the image they project that they are smarter and more responsible than Donald Trump and Trump's supporters. They self-identify as being better than the people they believe to be political normies. But they essentially support and promote the economic agenda of the global regime, which is not an agenda for economic liberty. And they pursue the social agenda of the Marxists because everyone should be allowed to do whatever they want. Much like the Ron DeSantis supporters, they believe they represent the principled opposition to both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And they have no problem pretending the elections are real. They have talked themselves into the belief that they have a good explanation about why they were justified in ignoring the fraudulence of our elections. They went along and capitulated to the central narrative following the obviously stolen in broad daylight 2020 election because of the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum, and they never want to be held accountable for that. So they can't actually ever admit that, yes, our elections are rigged and stolen, and Donald Trump actually won, and all of them just silenced themselves. They got on their knees, they groveled as the subjects they are, and they obeyed. You cannot both be a strong, proud, philosophical libertarian and be a loyal and groveling subject of a corrupt government who violates not only all of your natural rights that you're supposed to care about, but your constitutional rights, your birthrights as an American. They censor you and nullify your vote and your primary concern is figuring out how to disassociate yourself from Biden supporters and Trump supporters, not realizing that by doing that, you are actually just siding with the Biden supporters. So Trump went into at least a semi-hostile environment at the Libertarian National Convention. Before he even got up to speak, the Libertarian Party leaders and delegates left the main convention floor to go have a vote. When they returned, they found Trump supporters filling up all the front rows and got very upset. They tried to have security make those mean Trump supporters leave so that the Libertarian Party people could get right back up there in front of Donald Trump and very likely try to disrupt his speech. The mainstream media, as you might imagine, blanket coverage on how Donald Trump was booed by some of the Libertarian Party members. This is meant to show that Donald Trump actually is very, very unpopular outside of his own base. But what you saw was a president go speak at the convention of another, quote unquote, rival political party. When have you seen that before? Ever? I don't think I have. So there were multiple anti-Trump factions at this Libertarian National Convention. One by the RFK people and another, as we'll see, who elected the Libertarian Party's candidate this year, a man named Chase Oliver, and we'll get to him. But Trump accepts the invitation to speak. He goes to the Libertarian National Convention to speak, which puts them on the map and gets national attention on their convention for the first time ever. And they basically showed themselves to be insolent twerps with totally misplaced political priorities. And it was obvious in some of their reactions. Here's Donald Trump putting them in their places. This is right after Trump went and asked for their votes and their support.
That's nice. That's nice. Only if you want to win. Only if you want to win. Maybe you don't want to win. Maybe you don't want to win. Thank you, D-Roy. Thank you. No, only do that if you want to win. If you want to lose, don't do that. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years.
Now, people are going to say that's rude, but Trump is right. They get a very low percentage every 4 years. The party is essentially meaningless. But there was one moment in there where I think Trump might have been making a euphemism again. He said, maybe you want to lose. Maybe you want to lose. Now, is he saying that figuratively? Maybe you are pursuing a losing strategy by choice as if you want to lose? Or is he suggesting that the Libertarian Party and its leadership is legitimately in it to lose? That this third party who shows up as an also-ran every 4 years and does virtually nothing beyond that may in fact exist only as the Washington Generals to the Uniparty's Harlem Globetrotters. Whoever the Uniparty decides is going to win that year, there's a third-party candidate propped up on the other side so a narrative can be delivered to the public about how that third-party candidate took away the votes that were needed for the actually popular candidate to win, and therefore the less popular of the Uniparty candidates ended up winning. Maybe they want to lose. They're doing nothing on election integrity. They're not even admitting that there's an election problem. So there's certainly no chance they could ever win. They are in denial about one of the most fundamental aspects of our modern political circumstances in America. There's no point in talking about winning. They don't even know what game they're playing. So I said that the mainstream media went wild over this. They wanted to pitch Donald Trump's unpopularity in front of this group who should be inclined to support someone like Donald Trump, though, of course, not Donald Trump because he's so evil and bad and whatnot. The headline in NBC News, Trump booed and jeered at Libertarian National Convention. And you can scroll down this article. There is a picture with the caption, Libertarians jeer Donald Trump at the Libertarian National Convention. The person pictured is a man pretending to be a woman. That is the Libertarian delegate we're talking about here. I imagine that sadly, Donald Trump will not be able to secure your vote. NBC News writes, The audience yelled at Trump throughout his speech as well, a stark contrast to his typical crowds filled with adoring fans decked out in MAGA gear. At one point during Saturday's speech, punches were thrown in the audience. One member of the crowd shouted, "Lock him up," and another yelled, "Donald Trump is a threat to democracy." Moments later, someone yelled at Trump, "You had your shot." Others yelled at Trump, "F you, and you already had 4 years, you a-hole." Twice, people shouting, "We want Trump," were drowned out by boos and chants of "End the Fed," as if that would somehow be offensive to Donald Trump or his supporters. But here is one of those "End the Fed" chanting moments. Listen to how Donald Trump handles this.
Thank you. And I will also stop Joe Biden's crusade to crush crypto. We're going to stop it. I will ensure that the future of crypto and the future of Bitcoin will be made in the USA, not driven overseas. I will support the right to self-custody to the nation's 50 million crypto holders. I say this with your vote. I will keep Elizabeth Warren and her goons away from your Bitcoin. And I will never allow the creation of a central bank digital currency.
So Trump responds to chants of "End the Fed" by diverting the conversation to Bitcoin, preventing the central bank digital currency, and protecting the right of people to self-custody their Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency. All of that is more libertarian than ending the Fed, and it is more libertarian than everything else in the libertarian platform. He just promoted the ability of people to use a currency outside of government manipulation and control. And the crowd barely reacted, probably because not too many of them even understand what he's talking about. That should be impossible. They showed up to boo Donald Trump, and as he proceeds through a long laundry list of things he's accomplished that should please libertarians and agenda items for the future that should please libertarians, they don't even seem to know what their own priorities are. It's like the primary purpose for most of them being there was just to interfere with Donald Trump's appearance. And by the way, I haven't discussed it too much in the last couple of weeks on this podcast, but Donald Trump has made serious moves in the direction of Bitcoin. And he is now talking about self-custody, and he is separating Bitcoin from other cryptocurrencies because they're not the same. If you have not spent the time with this yet, I really encourage you to do it, because in 5 years or 10 years, you might be looking back and thinking, oh man, I really should have given that some attention and some time back in 2024, or maybe even earlier. I remember making fun of a friend of mine back in 2017 because he bought one Bitcoin for like $8,000 or something. Well, it's been 7 years and his investment has gone up like 9 times. And it's still early. And the biggest, loudest, and potentially most important voice on the public stage in the world right now is beginning to publicly back it. No one's going to force you to look into it. No one's going to force you to invest in it. But it seems increasingly likely that it will be an important part of the future. So if you're just ignoring it, you're really only stunting your own potential. And by the way, I get it that everything feels so overwhelming. There's way too much information out there. There are too many things to learn. And I agree. But one of the important things to understand is that most of those things you think you have to learn, you actually don't have to learn those. There's a lot of nonsense and bullshit out there that feels like it's important, but is really just mindless entertainment. It is more important to understand what sound money is than it is to hear people talk about who Trump might choose as his vice president. And my point's not to say that we can't entertain ourselves or that none of this other stuff is important at all. It's just to say that if you are overwhelmed by information, then you need to figure out what to prioritize. And there are few subjects more important than the future of currency if you want to be prepared for whatever's next. Doesn't have to be scary, doesn't have to be boring. It's going to be a little complicated, like you're learning a new language at first, you're thinking in a different paradigm, but that's what we've become accustomed to by now. This whole period is about adapting to new paradigms. But let's get back to our discussion of third parties. So the people in the crowd watching this Trump speech at the Libertarian National Convention are ostensibly libertarians. They should be concerned with issues about personal liberty, individual sovereignty. And instead, they're booing Trump, chanting "End the Fed," which Trump has effectively done, and then failing to even comprehend some of the most proactively sovereign and liberty-oriented statements a serious presidential candidate has made in a long time. And of course, maybe they're just not used to serious presidential candidates. Again, we're talking about a party whose current leader is the unfunny comedian and political normie Dave Smith, who just so happened to be on Tucker Carlson's television show last week. Dave Smith going through his liberty-oriented normie takes on politics, talking about how he was right before all the rest of the normies on the very important issues. And of course, never mentioning the stolen elections or anything else that really matters. He knows he doesn't like neocons, and so all of his fans believe, oh yeah, Trump's another one of those neocons. There do not seem to be too many thinkers in that party. They're basically just Democrats at this point. The uniparty establishment is totally bereft of ideas on all sides, including this pretend third option. They are unable to break out of the false reality. But maybe Donald Trump showing up and speaking before their convention will give some of them a chance. Hopefully, many of them wake up and realize, oh yeah, this party's actually not doing anything for me. And I agree with almost everything Donald Trump says and stands for. He even went and gave them a nice big present, all wrapped up beautifully, big bow on the top. Before Trump spoke on Saturday, the convention was filled throughout the day with people wearing Free Ross t-shirts, holding up signs that said Free Ross, all talking about a man named Ross Ulbricht, who has been in prison for the last 11 years, having been blamed for all sorts of black market activities on the Silk Road website. The NBC article has this to say about it, and then we will get further into Ross Ulbricht. Ulbricht was sentenced to life in federal prison in 2015 for creating and operating a hidden website known as Silk Road that people used to buy and sell drugs, among other illegal goods and services. Many libertarians have called for Ulbricht's release. At the convention Saturday, the crowd was filled with Free Ross signs and took up chants in support of Ulbricht. Preet Bharara, who was U.S. Attorney for Manhattan when Ulbricht was sentenced in 2015, said in a press release at the time that Ulbricht's actions contributed to at least 6 deaths. Bharara also called Ulbricht a drug dealer and criminal profiteer. Preet Bharara, by the way, is a major uniparty communist and a malicious little Trump hater, totally Trump deranged. You don't hear about him all that much anymore. You got to wonder what happened. While in operation, Silk Road was used by thousands of drug dealers and other unlawful vendors to distribute hundreds of kilograms of illegal drugs and other unlawful goods and services to more than 100,000 buyers, and to launder hundreds of millions of dollars deriving from these unlawful transactions. Immigration and Customs Enforcement said in a 2015 press release announcing Ulbricht's sentencing. NBC wants to let you know that Trump's not really going to do it, they write. However, Trump's previous comments about drug dealers are in conflict with his Saturday vow to commute Ulbricht's sentence. No, they aren't, because Ulbricht wasn't a drug dealer. He operated a platform where other people did things. He wasn't making drugs. He wasn't transporting drugs. He wasn't selling drugs. That's Pfizer. The former president said the death penalty should be instituted for certain drug dealers depending on the severity of the crime. And again, Pfizer. And given that history, Libertarians seem to view the vow to commute Ulbricht's sentence as calculated. Do you think Donald Trump even knew Ross Ulbricht's name before he decided to come here and pander to us? Libertarian politician Chase Oliver asked the crowd following Trump's remarks, and Chase Oliver went on to secure his party's nomination. And again, we'll get right back to him in just a second. But let's get a little more on Ross Ulbricht. This is from CoinDesk.com in 2022. This is April 22nd, 2022. Seized Silk Road Bitcoin to clear Ross Ulbricht's $183 million debt. Silk Road creator Ross Ulbricht will see his $183 million debt wiped out following the seizure of $3 billion in Bitcoin connected to an unnamed Silk Road hacker, according to a court filing. In 2015, Ulbricht was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was also ordered to pay $183 million in restitution, a figure calculated from the total illegal sales on Silk Road using an exchange rate at the time of each transaction. So they basically just made it up. Court documents in 2020 reveal that the Justice Department seized 69,370 Bitcoins from a hacker who moved the trove to a private wallet in April 2013. Ulbricht has been given a surprising reprieve, with the Justice Department making a deal with him in February 2021 that forfeits any claim Ulbricht may have had to the stolen Bitcoin in exchange for the restitution to be repaid once the Bitcoin is sold. The parties agreed that the net proceeds realized from the sale of the Bitcoin forfeited pursuant to this agreement shall be credited toward any unpaid balance of the money judgment. The court filing reads. Now that much Bitcoin would be worth almost $5 billion now. $3 billion in 2021, by the way, $5 billion now. Amazing, isn't it? But from the sale of that Bitcoin, Ross Ulbricht's debts have now been paid. He has spent 11 years in prison, and Trump promises to get him out. Here's what his Wikipedia entry says about his creation and operation of Silk Road. Palmer Tree, co-founder of Good Wagon Books, eventually moved to Dallas, leaving Ulbricht to run the bookseller by himself. Around this time, Ulbricht began planning Silk Road, initially called Underground Brokers. In his personal diary, he outlined his idea for a website, quote, where people could buy anything anonymously with no trail whatsoever that could lead back to them, end quote. Ulbricht's ex-girlfriend said, I remember when he had the idea. He said something about the Silk Road in Asia and what a big network it was. And that's what he wanted to create. So he thought it was the perfect name. Ulbricht alluded to Silk Road on his public LinkedIn page, where he discussed his wish to, quote, use economic theory as a means to abolish the use of coercion and aggression amongst mankind, end quote, and claimed, quote, I am creating an economic simulation to give people a firsthand experience of what it would be like to live in a world without the systemic use of force, end quote. Silk Road ran as an onion service on the Tor network, which implements data encryption and routes traffic through intermediary servers to anonymize the source and destination Internet Protocol addresses. So basically, he just sets up a series of pass-throughs so that a transaction cannot be followed from beginning to end. Back to Wikipedia. By hosting his market as a Tor site, Ulbricht could conceal the server's IP address and thus its location. Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency, was used for transactions on the site. While all Bitcoin transactions were recorded in a public ledger called the blockchain, users who avoided linking their legal names to their cryptocurrency wallets were able to conduct transactions with considerable anonymity. Ulbricht used the Dread Pirate Roberts username for Silk Road, although it is disputed whether only he used that account. He attributed his inspiration for creating the Silk Road marketplace to the novel Alongside Night and the works of Samuel Edward Konkin III. The Dread Pirate Roberts, by the way, is the alter ego of the heroic character Wesley from the movie The Princess Bride. It was the name of a captain of a pirate ship, but when the Dread Pirate Roberts would die or retire, he would pass the name on to someone else. So there was a new Dread Pirate Roberts. And Albrecht may have been the only one for Silk Road, but he also may not have been. Now you can see why someone like this might be a hero to people concerned with liberty and the way our financial system and our currency is used to eliminate liberty. The central bank digital currency would be the ultimate endpoint of the elimination of liberty through the currency and the financial system. Rather than being anonymous, everything would be totally tracked. Rather than getting to buy whatever you want with no consequence at all, you have your access totally cut off. If you make the wrong financial decisions, your social credit score will be dropped. You can be prevented from shopping in certain places or buying too much of the same thing. So Albrecht is seen as something of a pioneer in that space, and obviously the Bitcoin aspect is critical. Now, at some point, you might wonder if Ross Ulbricht is actually the public face of something entirely different than what it's portrayed to be, kind of like Elon Musk with Twitter and Tesla and Starlink and SpaceX and the Boring Company and all the rest of it. You have to imagine that Preet Bharara's name will probably be back in the news in the relatively near future. So Trump says he's going to free Ross Ulbricht, and the Libertarian candidate calls Trump's honesty and integrity into question, declaring that Trump won't actually do that. And of course, the argument was made from all corners that if Trump was going to do that, he would have done it in his first term. Apparently, this is the sort of thing that normies think is very smart. Trump said he was going to drain the swamp and he didn't. He said he was going to do X, Y, Z and he didn't. Therefore, he won't in the future, as if he wasn't intending to do things in his second term that could have been accomplished, or at least obviously visibly, publicly accomplished by Trump, if all of the deranged Trump haters had actually focused on the fact that our elections are stolen, rather than being happy to go along with their friends, their controlled opposition on the uniparty left, in agreeing that, yeah, even if Donald Trump actually did win the election, it's better that we all say he didn't. They complain about jobs Trump said he would finish that aren't quite finished, even though they helped in thwarting a proper review of the rigged and stolen 2020 election. As usual, these people have no moral standing, and all of that nonsense can be disregarded. They told us Trump wouldn't do it, and then they got right back to holding up their Free Ross signs and chanting Free Ross, knowing that Trump wouldn't do it, and they're still the ones really helping this man, Ross Ulbricht. Well, Ross Ulbricht decided to tweet from prison the next morning. By the way, all of this is an op, okay? Just understand that it's an op. But Ross Ulbricht says, last night, Donald Trump pledged to commute my sentence on day one if reelected. Thank you, thank you, thank you. After 11 years, it is hard to express how I feel at this moment. It is thanks to your undying support that I may get a second chance. So Ross Ulbricht supports Trump. He's very thankful for Trump's statement, but all of the quote unquote libertarians at the convention who don't really understand what their own priorities are supposed to be know that their biggest priority is freeing Ross Ulbricht. I guess they just happen to disagree with the duly elected president and with Ross Ulbricht about the best way to go ahead and free Ross Ulbricht. Apparently, they decided it would be by nominating Chase Oliver as their presidential candidate. After 8 rounds of voting, Oliver won out over a man named Michael Rectenwald, who was the favorite of the Libertarian Party's Mises caucus. CNN, in their coverage of Oliver's victory, ended the article discussing Rectenwald. Rectenwald told CNN while voting was still ongoing at the convention that Oliver winning the nomination would signify an embrace of wokeness, which he called, quote, an authoritarian, totalitarian ideology. And he is right about that. It kind of turns the party into a referendum, sort of, for a particular kind of status ideology, one that is interested in protecting special identity categories. That is effectively woke ideology. Oliver, who is gay, has said he joined the Libertarian Party after encountering the party at the Atlanta Pride Festival in 2010. In 2020, he ran as a Libertarian in the special election in Georgia's 5th Congressional District to replace the late Rep. John Lewis. In 2022, he ran for Senate against Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker. How about that? Were we told that Warnock won by just a little bit over Herschel Walker, the MAGA candidate? Yup. We are told that Warnock beat Walker head-to-head in their December runoff, but in the general election in November, where Chase Oliver was a candidate, he received around 81,000 votes, representing 2% of the turnout. So if he wasn't in that race and Walker or Warnock had Oliver's 2% of the vote, either one of those men would have gone over 50%, winning the election and then avoiding the runoff. That race following a pattern we have seen a number of times in races that could go to a runoff. So Chase Oliver is at least somewhat familiar with this idea of being a third-party spoiler candidate. This is from Zero Hedge's coverage. The headline from yesterday: Mises caucus just exploded. Libertarian Party nominates left-winger Chase Oliver. About halfway down the article, Oliver has made national waves before. Running on the Libertarian line in the 2020 Georgia Senate election, Oliver took 2% of the vote, forcing a runoff between Democrat and eventual winner Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, the woefully unqualified endorsee of Donald Mr. Poor Personnel Picks Trump. And the Tyler Durden character who writes Zero Hedge is legitimately blackpilled and unfortunately such a normie that he's probably not going to make it. He is also incorrect there. That was the 2022 midterm Georgia Senate election. In 2020, Warnock and Ossoff won, in quotes, their elections in runoffs over David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler. But back to the Zero Hedge article. Oliver, who has described himself as armed and gay, will be the party's youngest ever nominee at age 38. Among his many stances that will repel not only many libertarians, but also other right-wing voters seeking a Trump alternative. And again, Zero Hedge thinks that there is some actual base of these people or that they might have a point. LGBT. He said, I'm not going to stop being a visible ally for trans people. Never. He opposes gender transition surgeries for anyone under age 18, but has written favorably of, quote unquote, puberty pausing for kids. He supports having trans women in girls' sports. On abortion, he's pro-choice. He said he supports codifying Roe v. Wade, but opposes federal funding of abortions. He believes in climate change, but seems to favor private solutions and has strongly advocated nuclear energy. He opposes new gun laws and says he'd work to repeal existing ones. So I guess that's kind of liberty-oriented. On immigration, he wants to radically simplify our immigration system and create a simpler path to citizenship. And the article includes a series of old Chase Oliver tweets. In 2022, he wrote, guess what? I went to a Pride event featuring a drag queen story time, and there was no grooming or sexualization, just happy kids hearing a story about rainbows. When you see something firsthand, you can see past media scare tactics. Oh yeah, if only you're there, you'll realize that it's not a bunch of old deranged perverts trying to rub their crotch around on children. He said in 2021, I finally found a KF94 mask I find to be comfortable, and my mask and glasses lanyard arrived, so I don't have to just stuff it in my pocket or on a table when I sit down to eat. Yes, I wear a mask where businesses require it or where distancing is impossible. Unfunny comedian, podcast bro, and Tucker Carlson guest Dave Smith said on X, formerly Twitter, "Congratulations to Chase Oliver on his win. He wasn't my preferred candidate, but he ran a great campaign, put it together, and won. I appreciate that he is unapologetically anti-war, and I hope he leads with that in his presidential campaign. I wish him the best of luck spreading that message." Dave Smith, very based and red-pilled. Hey, Dave, I know you're a normie, but even you should be able to tell that if you are anti-war, your best bet is to support Donald Trump. Instead, the libertarians have a gay man who attends drag queen story time, believes in climate change, and thinks that masks work. The Zero Hedge article concludes with a post on X, formerly Twitter, by a man named Mitch Stockton, who says, Chase Oliver, the Libertarian Party nominated Chase effing Oliver? The Libertarian Convention got Trump and RFK Jr. to come and speak and got more coverage than ever, then nominated Chase Oliver. Trump is a jackass, but he said it right. Maybe all you want is 3%. So disappointing. And it sounds like Mitch Stockton is a jackass too. You really do have to wonder when all of these wannabe right-wing normies are going to figure out that they've been wrong for the last 4 years, as they've said the same things over and over and over and over and over again about Donald Trump and about their own priorities, and they have found that they are wrong in both of these cases. They should be able to tell by now that everything is trending in the wrong direction. Maybe they should switch strategies. But nope. This is how libertarians end up being unable to understand self-custodying Bitcoin as a better option even than ending the Fed, and then nominating a gay, woke Trump hater. It really is like they want to lose. And when you think about that, you immediately realize that Donald Trump has just shined a bright light on a problem that virtually no one even knew existed. The phenomenon of these third-party spoiler candidates is no longer up for debate. Again, no offense to libertarian philosophies, but the party is a clown show. Donald Trump just showed up at their convention and let the country know, hey, however they're going to use this whole third-party op, they're not going to be able to pull that off now. Because I just showed you all what this party actually is. They don't believe the things that they ostensibly stand for. They embody every problem with the establishment that already exists in Washington. They align in a substantial way with the Democrats and the woke agenda. And it seems as though their primary motivation is being anti-Trump and anti-MAGA without having to be blamed for it, because that would really ruin their reputations. Now, Trump asked for their endorsement and their vote, and he didn't get it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was proposed as a nominee, but he didn't get the support. They went with Chase Oliver, not RFK Jr., who could have had national attention on the party. Chase Oliver, the man who's going to stand up for libertarians' right to be trans if they want to. It could hardly have turned out better for Donald Trump if Donald Trump himself had written the script. They showed up. They tried to make Trump look bad. He made them look foolish to their faces. He ran down a laundry list of things he had accomplished on their behalf, things he would do in the future on their behalf. He even said he would bring libertarians into his White House. And that wasn't good enough. They just don't like Donald Trump. He told them he would protect their Bitcoin. He would keep Liz Warren away from it. He would prevent the CBDC, and he would protect their right to self-custody, and they barely even knew what he was talking about. They wanted Ross Ulbricht freed. He said he would do it, and then they decided, oh, we don't believe you because we already decided we hate you. And then Ross Ulbricht himself came out to thank Donald Trump in a show of support for Donald Trump's comments. And then they nominated an avatar for the absurdity of wokeness. The party just ended itself, maybe forever, rather than looking like a serious alternative, rather than being the sorts of people who might be able to attract that group of disaffected voters who don't like Trump and don't like Biden. Not that that's the way the media portrays, but rather than doing that, they make themselves look foolish and petty. They make the whole thing look like an anti-Trump op, and then they choose someone that no one even wants in the conversation. They essentially said to the country, our movement is not worth taking seriously. And of course it's not, because it's essentially led in public by Dave Smith, who apparently still believes that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. Third parties are narrative devices. Donald Trump just showed us that this weekend. And at this point, you have to think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is playing along with that. The regime, the Uniparty, intended to make use of the third-party narrative device. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., unless he is that third-party narrative device, has joined the race specifically to blow up the possibility and the believability of that third-party opportunity. Why is there no labels candidate? It seems to be because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. already became that person. He took up all that space. It's not about the votes. It's about the narrative device. There is no space for another third-party contender to come into the picture at this point. And I'm not saying that fact just emerged this weekend. That's been true for quite a long time, which is why there is no labels candidate. But it wouldn't even be believable. Think about all of this the next time you see one of those polls with Trump and Biden and RFK Jr. and Cornel West and Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips and whoever else. Maybe they'll start polling Chase Oliver. But the goal of those polls is to keep Donald Trump under 50% so that it looks like there is still a wide majority opposed to Donald Trump. The idea being that as the election draws closer, those third-party candidates will drop out and then endorse the major party candidate. Like you would see Marianne Williamson and Cornel West drop out and say to their supporters, their 3% each, let's say, that they had a good campaign and they shared an important message and everything they did with one another was just so important and meaningful and special to everyone involved. But now we face this urgent threat of another term of Donald Trump as president. So therefore, the only responsible thing for any of us to do is put our support behind Joe Biden. And all of a sudden, just like that, you can give Joe Biden 6 points. And tell the public that like-minded people have decided to coalesce behind Biden. Sure, he's not their favorite, but he's better than Donald Trump, and it's getting down to that point where we can't just keep doing the third-party protest vote thing, so everybody's just going to have to come on board. Now, I don't think anybody can imagine Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dropping out and endorsing Joe Biden. I could imagine him dropping out and endorsing Donald Trump, though I don't think it's likely. I think he'll probably just stay in. But that's a whole lot different than someone like Liz Cheney being in the game on a third-party no-labels ticket, especially if she named some Democrat or crossover like herself as a running mate. That would get all of the national television attention. They would be pushed to be put on stage at the debates, and they would always be framed as the reasonable alternative to these other two totally unsatisfactory options. And even if that didn't convince enough people, because of course it wouldn't, Liz Cheney could drop out on behalf of the Uniparty and tell all her supporters to support Joe Biden. She's going to support Joe Biden too. And then the media can really make a case that Donald Trump has never been over 50%. And with all of these third-party candidates dropping out and putting their support behind Joe Biden, now it's clear that Joe Biden really is the choice when it's just down to those two. That is a very powerful narrative device that has been used against us many times. And I think that Donald Trump just signaled the beginning of the end on that, while also rubbing Ross Ulbricht in the faces of the deep state and championing Bitcoin. It was a pretty good weekend in enemy territory. The live stream tomorrow will be at 3 p.m. Eastern. I will be sending out that invitation and the link to the live stream later today. That will be for paid subscribers. Of course, if you have questions or topics you would like to discuss or articles you would like to share for the interactive live stream, please just put them in the comments of that Substack post with the link to the live stream. Otherwise, I will be back on this podcast on Thursday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's